Hi, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Buzz. I'm your host, Brad, and we are joined today by a very special guest, Colin Carr, the founder and CEO of CARR, which is a healthcare realty company providing services for healthcare practitioners and dentists. So, Colin, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, after learning about what you guys do and how important it is for dental practices to not only have a right location, but have favorable terms and understand that their lease is the second it's the second greatest cost behind their staff, their team. It'll impact profitability, valuation, marketing, all these things. So first off, just tell us basically about CARR and what you guys do.
Yeah, definitely. So we are coming up on our 15th year of being in business. I've been doing real estate for about 22, 23 years now. And we started CARR with the mission of just protecting healthcare providers. I was on the landlord side up until that point, and I just had a number of transactions where I was working for very large, sophisticated medical and healthcare landlords, and I just had a number of deals where I did a great job for my client, the landlord, and the doctors got absolutely crushed, just completely manhandled in the transactions. And what I mean by that is they overpaid by hundreds of thousands of dollars in the leases. They didn't get the free rent they should have got. They didn't get the TI allowance. They were off in all these different areas. And so after a number of deals like that, I just saw a bunch of doctors getting taken advantage of, in my opinion. So we launched CARR, and our entire mission is helping them with anything that's real estate related. Relocations, renewals, purchases, ground up construction, anything that's real estate related for a doctor, we do. And we're coast to coast now.
Beautiful. And do dentists find you directly, or are you more referral based through maybe their practice management consultants, or how do you develop these relationships?
Yeah, a little bit of everything. I mean, our top source of getting deals today is from existing clients. We have over 4,500 healthcare providers that we're doing work for right now as we speak. So we touch a lot of deals each year. Definitely working with a lot of referral partners though as well. We get brought in by lenders, CPAs, practice management, anybody that's involved in the transaction. The real estate's a catalyst for the deal happening in a lot of scenarios, or at least happening properly, where there's a real budget left over, for marketing, for other aspects of the deal, technology, et cetera. So we get brought in by a lot of people, but we also just go to direct to the doctors as well.
Beautiful. And so in your opinion, how much is really on the line let's just call it a dental real estate negotiation?
Yeah, there's typically a couple $100,000 on the line. And when people hear that number, especially dentists, their first question is like, is there really that much money in the line? They have kind of a mentality, I think, a lot of times, like residential, you can go into a neighborhood, a lot of the houses are similarly priced, similar vintage, similar finishes. And so is there really that much, wiggle room? And the answer is absolutely. You get into a dental space, let's say it's 2,500 square feet. And if you overpay by a couple of dollars per square foot, and by the way, for the listeners, California does it per square foot per month. Almost every other state does it per square foot per year. So if you overpay by, let's say, $3 a square foot per year times 2,500 square feet, that's $7,500 per year extra that you're paying in rent that you should have avoided if you were properly represented. And that's a pretty minor margin. $3 a square foot is easy to miss on. And then you get into annual increases. You get into, if you don't capture the right TI allowance, the right free rent package, all these other areas, I mean, it adds up to a couple $100,000 very quickly. And if we're talking about dentists, you bill a dollar, you don't keep a dollar. You might be on a 25% profit margin, you might be on a 50% profit margin if you're just slaying it. But you make a $250,000, $300,000 mistake on your lease, that can literally be $1 million to $1.5 million of production you have to produce over a 10-year period just to pay the bill for the mistakes that you made. So there's a lot on the line.
Absolutely. What does a TI allowance stand for?
TI allowance stands for tenant improvement allowance. So a couple terms are synonymous: renovation allowance, build allowance. And so the idea there is that when you give a commercial landlord a long-term lease, in exchange for that, not having to release the space every year, like in residential, you're releasing properties or apartments every year. Commercial, you do a long-term lease, like a 7 or 10-year lease. Landlords will put a healthy amount of cash in value into that property in exchange for you signing up for a long-term deal. So TI allowance, that's a standard term on any new deal. It's also standard on lease renewals. And that's the number one transaction, by the way, where dentists lose money. Lease renewals, we talk about that in a little bit, but a lot of money wasted in those scenarios.
So I'm curious about a lease renewal. Like what are some of the maybe top mistakes that dental offices are making with lease renewals and just their office space in general?
Yeah, so lease renewals, the reason that so many doctors lose money there is because the landlord's going to go into that transaction assuming that the doctor is happy in the space, it's inconvenient to move, they don't want to take the time to go find a new location, borrow money to build out, move their equipment and technology, notify the patients, notify all the credentials, etc. So landlords go into those deals thinking basically I have the upper hand, and unless the dentist has a real strategy of proper representation, they're going to get pushed into a corner and they're going to get forced into signing a lease that's probably not very favorable. So the average dentist goes into a lease renewal, doesn't have representation, doesn't go to the market and negotiate with multiple landlords, doesn't keep a real posture and strategy with their current landlord, doesn't start the transaction at the right time. And all these things indicate to the landlord that they're going to take whatever they have to take in order to get this deal done. And so a lot of doctors, a lot of dentists on lease renewals, they'll lose $200,000-$300,000 like that.
That's crazy. What would be your advice? Like if someone's deciding, do I purchase or lease an office? Like what's the recommendation there?
Well, the first thing that you want to do is hire professional representation. Let them take the time to go to market. Let them perform the due diligence. And the first thing is, are there any properties that are even available for sale? And that one, if you've not been to market before, that might seem confusing because in residential, there's always a house for sale in some neighborhood. But in commercial, if you want to be in a specific trade area, it's not uncommon to have like an entire like intersection or a submarket where there's not one property for sale. They're all large office buildings or complexes or retail centers. And even if they are for sale, they're $20-30 million. So the first question is, are there any properties available for sale that meet your requirement? If the answer is yes, the next questions are, can you see yourself there for the next 10-15 years? Like you don't do a purchase in commercial real estate if you're not sure if you want to be there for less than 10 years. It's just too expensive of a transaction. It's too difficult to get in and out. If the answer is yes, the property is for sale, I can see myself there for a long time. Next question is, can you afford it? Do you have the down payment? How does it affect your cash flow? Typically, a purchase is going to cost you more per month than a lease scenario will, but you also pick up additional tax deductions, depreciation. Every check you cut, you're paying down principal, so your net worth is going up every month. So the questions at that point are, can you afford it from a cash flow standpoint? And if you can check that box, then we just get into a very detailed purchase versus lease analysis on the economics, and the numbers will tell you which one makes more sense. Ultimately, there's going to be the emotional aspect of which property do you like more? Where do you see yourself being more fulfilled? Where do you think you're going to be able to attract the better and higher quality staff? Does one property give you, a higher opportunity, a percentage of referrals from patients, stuff like that? But if you're pretty much apples to apples, to me, owning real estate is one of the greatest investments you can ever make as a healthcare provider, because you're banking the investment, or let me say it this way, the risk of the investment is the success of your practice. You are the number one tenant you could ever ask for. And so a lot of people will go purchase commercial real estate. They'll pay off that building in 15-20 years, and they'll be sitting there with an asset that's worth more than their practice, well over 3/4 of the time. And so your practice might be worth $1 million or $1.5 million or what have you. That real estate's usually worth even more. So it's a great way to have an additional asset that's predicated upon the success of your practice. And you need a home anyway. So if you can pay yourself, that's a great way to do it.
I love that. Okay, so that totally makes sense to own the asset, own the location, especially when it could be potentially worth more than a practice 3/4 of the time. Let's say there's someone who's like, wherever we are, there's not even anything for sale and we don't want to build something. If they're going to go rent the spot, what would be your advice for someone to say, let's say they wanted to save $100,000 in this lease renewal? Ballpark number. What would be your advice for how they could go ahead and save that amount of money?
So the first thing you need to understand is you have to have the proper timing. If you call your landlord 2 months before your lease expires, they're going to know that you have no opportunity to move that practice in time. You're going to get backed into a corner. And you say, well, what if I don't sign a new lease? Well, number one, they can try to evict you. But number two, most leases have a trigger that if you don't sign a new lease or you don't get out of the space, you go into what's called a holdover provision. And most holdover provisions mean they can charge you 150 to 200% of your of your rent. So if you're paying $8,000 a month, they can charge you, 12 to 16,000. So that puts you in a really compromised position. So the first thing is you got to make sure you start at the right time. 12 months is the perfect time to start. You can go a little earlier than that if you want to, but you start at 12 months. The second thing you do is you hire professional representation. You don't call the landlord yourself. You don't send an email saying, send me a proposal. All those things communicate you don't know what you're doing. And let me pause for a second. You got to ask yourself the question here. What are the most savvy tenants in the world doing? Like if it's retail, what's a Chipotle or a Starbucks doing? If it's an office, like what's Lockheed Martin or what's one of these savvy, like a Charles Schwab, what are they doing with their real estate? They're doing this. They're having professional people that specialize in real estate handle it for them. Now, next thing you do is that agent or that broker, they go to market and they look at all the options available to you for lease, for sale. They pre-qualify, they perform due diligence, and then they take you to market to show you what your other options are. And someone might say, well, hey, what if I don't want to move? The answer is it doesn't matter if you don't want to move. You still have to see the market. We can't make an informed decision with your current landlord if we don't know what we're comparing it to. If our only basis for comparison is what you're currently paying, that's a terrible form of measurement because we don't know if you have a good deal or bad deal because that's predicated upon the market. You might be paying a lease rate you think is fair, or it might be inside like the stated like 6 to 8% overall, gross revenue should be your rent. But if you're overpaying by a couple $100,000 compared to your other options, the ratios don't matter. You're still overpaying by hundreds of thousands. So that they take you to market, that you look at your top options, and then they're going to negotiate with 3 or 4 other landlords simultaneously. And this is the difference between commercial and residential. Residential, when you go to market, you find that house that you want to purchase or you can see yourself living in, you submit a contract, and if the seller says, yes, you're under contract, you're locked and loaded. In commercial real estate, you negotiate on what's called a non-binding LOI, letter of intent, or an RFP, request for proposal. And so in commercial, you're going back and forth with like 3 or 4 landlords, and you might go 3 or 4 rounds of negotiations. And you say, again, why do I do that? It's because, again, you're trying to compare lease rate with a free rent allowance, with a build allowance, with a TI allowance, with annual increases, and then all these other economic terms that get put in there. And you don't have to wonder at that point if you have a good deal or not. You don't have to wonder, I wonder if another landlord would have given me a better deal, or I wonder if I'm overpaying here. The numbers will tell you clearly this is what it looks like. This is the real estate version of taking an x-ray of your tooth. If you wonder what's going on, let's just get an x-ray of, let's go right to see what's happening on the inside of it. And then we don't have to wonder what's happening anymore.
I love that analogy, Colin. That's very, very powerful.
Yeah. So you negotiate with 3 or 4 landlords, and then at that point, you know what the market bears. And so then you have your broker go back to your current landlord, and they are the ones submitting the offer, and they're the ones dictating the terms because it's predicated on what other people are willing to do for you. It's not, again, compared to what I'm currently paying, it's what are my other options in the market. And that puts you in a position of strength. You've got other options. You're not pushed into a corner. You're not going to be taken advantage of. You're not wondering what a good versus an average versus a bad deal is. And once the landlord of your current property knows that you're not playing games, that you're educated, you have a strategy, you have representation that can help you execute, that's when that landlord of your current property is going to bring a real offer to the table. And that's when the current landlord starts to compete to keep you in that space, because you might say, I don't want to relocate. The landlord doesn't want you to move worse than you don't want to move, if that makes sense. Like you might say, I don't want to move. The landlord doesn't want you to move worse than you don't want to move. But you're not going to get them to that position unless they have a fear of losing you and they think that you actually know what you're doing. So hopefully that's not too long, but you just have to have a strategy. And if you do that, you're gonna capture terms that literally will save you $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 on your renewal compared to what you would have paid if you just said, send me a proposal, or I guess I'll just take my renewal option.
No, that totally makes sense. This is fascinating to learn more about this. So you mentioned a few things, but what other aspects of this whole either purchase or lease do landlords know about negotiating that most like dentists typically don't know? Are there a couple of things that you might see a landlord put in one of these agreements or a letter of intent, and you're like, oh, they're trying to put a phrase in here to catch them or something? Maybe it's part of the proceeds or some random stuff that that landlords kind of know that maybe the dental community really doesn't know?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Landlords are notorious for making these ridiculous comments as if it's as if it's part of the Constitution. Like you can't change it. Like they'll say, "Hey, we don't do free rent on lease renewals," as if this is some you're gonna have to get like the House and the Senate to vote on this one. The president's gonna have to sign it into law. Or they'll say, we don't lower the lease rate on a lease renewal, even if you're like $6 above market. They'll say, well, we have a policy. I mean, they're notorious for making these comments. Well, the tenants always have to pay for this, or we can't go less than a 4% annual increase. And they make these statements all the time about lease rates and TI allowance and free rent, or you're not allowed to have a broker. And all they're doing is just literally just unilaterally making things up. It's literally the person says, because I said so. Like, hey, what do we do this for? And it's because I said so. That doesn't play with most people, but they hear a landlord say, like, oh, this landlord's got a policy. It's not a policy. They're literally just saying things to see if you are ignorant enough to believe it. And I don't mean that rudely. They're looking at a doctor saying, this guy's probably, or this guy or this lady's probably super smart when it comes to their craft, dentistry, or whatever their specialty is. When it comes to commercial real estate, if they show up unrepresented, they've already told us they have no clue what they're doing. Like no Fortune 500 company has some random person who does a lease every 5 years or 10 years, just kind of fumbling through the deal. Like they have stone cold killers that are in position on their real estate team or outside that are handling everything for them, that are not going to let them be taken advantage of. It's kind of like the idea, like nobody in their right mind would ever go to court without an attorney if they were being sued for a significant amount of money, or there's a real issue. Like you would never risk that.
Right.
If you've got a lease agreement that's worth $1 million or $2 million or whatever it might be, plus the value of your build out, plus the value of your equipment and technology, plus the value of your payroll and all the costs that go into these transactions. And then you're just throwing out ideas like, hey, send me a proposal, or, would you guys give me an extra month or two of free rent? It's a really bad strategy. So I would say this, the number one thing the landlord knows is that the doctor probably doesn't know what they're doing. Number two, the doctor doesn't have time to deal with it by themselves. If they're unrepresented, they're probably willing to take an inferior deal. And unless the landlord has a fear of loss, they're not going to do anything. They're not going to move. And again, that fear of loss is typically the only motivator for a landlord. Like, they're not motivated by you asking them for better terms. Like if I walked up to you and said, hey, Brad, would you give me $100,000? You'd say, why? And I'd say, well, I'm negotiating with you. And you'd say, take a hike. And I'd say, well, no, we're negotiating. You'd say, no, we're not negotiating. There's no reason for me to give you $100,000. The only way the landlord's going to give you $100,000 in lower lease rates is if they have a fear of loss, and that space might go vacant for 12 to 18 months. And the next deal might cost them $200,000-$300,000 to secure that deal. That's when $100,000 becomes at play.
What is Dental Year? Dental Year is the leading marketing app in dentistry. Created by marketers, this resourceful platform helps your dental practice in a variety of ways. Content inspiration, real-time marketing ideas, tips on ROI with your current methods, fresh resources, and lots more.
So over the last year or two with rates, and this is more so for like the bigger commercial buildings, where there's the Fortune 100s that rent in the big cities. Obviously they're doing some conversions into maybe more residential properties, and there hasn't been enough of those, but there's vacant office buildings around the country that I always drive by. I'm like, who's renting there right now? They can't even give away commercial lease because everyone's virtual and no one even lives in the cities anymore. And so even though a lot of these leases for maybe individual practices are maybe $1 million, $3 million at tops, are you seeing any potential deals where like 10 years ago, one of these wouldn't even be a thought because it would be so ridiculous of numbers, but now maybe some of these banks are holding these larger buildings with like, they know no one's signing these leases on some of these floors, and maybe some a practice who's maybe opening up another location who's got a great credit line or a good history. Are you seeing any deals where now you're like, wow, like they literally own like a pretty massive building, and in turn, not only is their practice going to be on the first floor where people walk by, but they're going to be almost their own landlord and rent out locations on other floors? Or is that maybe too premature for dentists to get into that?
I would say it depends on the market you're in. Like for instance, if we picked like, let's say Nashville, or if we said Milwaukee, or we said Denver, it is, those are such, as an example, those are such tight markets. I mean, it is a landlord's market all day long. The area that there is an opportunity, and you reference it, are like the larger office buildings. Those are the buildings that are experiencing the most vacancy right now. Retail retail soared through COVID, and there's more franchises and quick serve concepts and health and wellness concepts and everything under the sun coming to market than ever before. There's more money getting pumped into new ideas than ever before. So retail's not slowing down, industrial's not slowing down, multifamily's not slowing down. The area that's slowing down are the big office buildings. So there is an opportunity, in my opinion, if you're qualified to purchase those, that's an option for sure. But I think an easier option is convincing a traditional office landlord that maybe has never done healthcare or medical to start thinking about taking down a couple of spaces with healthcare. We did that in 2009. I started our company in 2009. The market was really tight. There was no new construction. The market had crashed in 2007, 2008. And so for the next like 3-4 years, 10, 11, 12, 13, we were taking these landlords that own these large office buildings, showing them the value of healthcare, why you wanted to make these deals, why these were sure bets for them that carried a lower default rate than any of these other traditional office users. And we had a lot of office landlords, like literally, I'd say probably 100 plus in Denver, never done healthcare or medical, that all of a sudden started vying and fighting for these deals. And it opened up a whole new realm of opportunities for dentists that we had never done before. So you're spot on with that, in my opinion.
Very cool. So are you talking with offices or doctors who are going saying, listen, this is the square footage I need for 5 operatories, whatever it may be. I want a modern vibe. I want a safe building for my team members. But is there also the conversation, listen, I want a location where my marketing spend is going to be 20% of what it needs to be because there's a Whole Foods next door, or people drive by, or it's a destination location. Because I'm thinking, great, you got a beautiful lease and you got good terms, but if you're buried in a building somewhere, no one knows you're there, you got to spend 20 times more on AdWords and branding and get more reviews as opposed to just being naturally found.
Yeah, I mean, there's a give and take on both sides. Like, for instance, the high visibility retail typically is a premium rent, typically costs more than the traditional office building. But the reality is you can never turn that off. So if you're paying an extra $3,000 a month in rent for that big sign and for Whole Foods to be in the center, and you're down a couple of stores from Starbucks, whatever, that's great. But if you get to the place where you're booking 2, 3, 4 months out, or you can't take on any more new patients immediately, or you've got issues with capacity, you can't turn that high volume, high visibility rent off. So that's one of the cons. The pro is all of the stuff you just said. The office space, you got to spend more money to get people's attention. However, there's some pros with office too. You typically get a better window line. You're typically saving money on rent. There's other things that are valuable to you in a number of scenarios, but you can turn that additional marketing on or off based upon your capacity. So a lot of times it comes down to what's available. You might say, I want to be in the Whole Foods Center, and they don't have any square footage or spaces available that meet your needs, and so you don't have an option. It's too big. If you do have that opportunity, it just comes down to the numbers. Like, is it worth an extra $3,000 a month? Well, that's going to be $360,000 over 10 years. How much marketing can you buy with $360,000? Is it comparable? Is it a good value? Is it a bad value? And then at the end of the day, there is going to be that emotional, this is just what I want. Like, I'm willing to pay more for this vehicle to drive over this vehicle. I know they both get me to the same destination, but I just want this one. So there's a lot of personal preferences that come into play as well.
So many different variables, and there's people listening from small towns, big cities. But let's just take that Whole Foods example, right? All right, Colin, let's just pretend for a second I want to open up my dream practice, 10 operatories. I want to be near a Whole Foods, not only for foot traffic and marketing, because I want to go there twice a day and get a yerba mate and some sushi. Well, I know in 2 years, without even trying, we're going to be booked out 6 months in advance. I'm just saying hypothetical, right? Which is probably the case anyway, but hypothetical. And like you said, there's going to be that premium $3,000 a month. That's like literally like with some of our offices, we have to pause AdWords because literally like you can't book, right? Like and sometimes it's busy and sometimes they just don't have like hygienists, which is a whole nother conversation. But let's just say you're over capacity, you got a $3,000 extra spend once again, it's a quality problem. I'd rather have that than the freak out mode. Are there any ever opportunities to go to the big shopping center people and say, listen, we want to pay, $5,000 a month in rent, not 10 a month, but we know we're going to be a great tenant. This is where we want to go. Well, let's cap it at 5, but we're going to give you a percentage of our profitability moving forward. So you're going to have a piece of it. And instead of you getting your 10, you might get 15 a month if we're partners.
There are some landlords, especially the large power centers, that will push for what's called a percentage rent structure.
Okay.
It's typically going to be more in favor of the landlord than versus the dentist. So we try to avoid that if we can for a number of reasons. They're not going to take a $5,000 rent with an upside to get up to 15. If the market's 10, they're going to take a 10 and try to get you to 15 anyway. So it's very rarely is it a win-win. It's typically like if they have the premier property and they can line up the prospects and choose who they want to, and you're competing, that's the time when they can grab the percentage rent. We try to avoid that if we possibly can, because we'd rather just say, look, like if we're going to bet on anybody, let's bet on ourselves. Let's go with the lowest lease rate possible.
Yeah.
Let's not give them a margin or opportunity to scrape away from the practice. Because a lot of times those percentage rents, they will smash you on a practice sale as well, or there'll be some teeth or claws into the next owner's pocketbook or sale, and it ends up hurting the selling doctor and the buying doctor in a lot of those scenarios.
That's interesting because there's like a famous carpet dealer up in Silicon Valley. He has a carpet store and he's given away like free rent space. I believe it's like in the garage or the floor above his store for years to like famous startups. And I don't want to, we should actually look this up. Let me look this up in real time because I want to see who this is. There's a venture. He's like an angel investor and he gives away like, I don't know if it's free rent, but basically like super, super cheap rent in Silicon Valley for equity percentage in these startups. And like, he's like, I think close to a billionaire. Pejman Nozad is one of Silicon Valley's most unlikely venture capitalists. Growing up in Iran during the Iranian Revolution, he dropped out of college to play soccer, write a sports column, and created one of, okay, so it talks about how Silicon Valley's hottest VC is a rugged dealer. There's a few of these. There's Lou Montulli, former engineer at Netscape. So it's interesting. I know this isn't for the typical thing because the typical practice, because, some practices are trying to be the next Airbnb. So there's not going to be a 500% or 5,000% return, but it kind of gets you thinking of like, maybe there's some creativity there if it's a win-win. They get 10% of a practice valuation, they could make a lot more down the road. I don't know if any deals are structured like that, but be interesting to see. Yeah.
It's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy. These venture capitalists, it's so smart. You get to give out the free rent and it's brilliant. What do you think that, in your opinion, how could dental offices or dentists basically increase their net worth, let's just say by 7 figures through commercial real estate?
It's going to come through ownership. The traditional commercial real estate loan is going to be a 20-year term. And again, that's different than residential. Most time when you go buy a house, you can do an arm as far as like the mortgage rate and so forth, as far as how long it's locked in. But most of the terms in residential, it's a 30-year term, 30-year AM. Commercial real estate, if it's an SBA loan, a small business administration loan, that's a 25-year term. But most commercial loans are 15, 20 years. And most dentists and healthcare providers pay them off early. So if you go out there and you purchase a commercial property for, let's say, $1 million or $1.2 million or $1.3 million, that'd be a pretty average size purchase for a dental office. And then you pump another, $400,000, $600,000, $800,000 into it. All of a sudden you're into that property for $1.5 million, $2 million. Commercial real estate on average appreciates 1% to 2% conservatively. You can have a down year, you can have a down couple of years, but just like the stock market, just kind of that bell curve, it just keeps going up and down. But historically, it still trends up. Even when it goes down, it goes back up and it reaches its previous high. So, the average dental office ownership is going to appreciate 1%, 2%, 3% per year over 15, 20 years. And so if you pay that thing off, you buy a building for $1 million, $1.2 million, you put $500,000 into it, you're going to have a property that's worth, $2.5 million after a 15, 20-year period of time, paid for free and clear. And then you're going to have the option of, do you sell that when you sell the practice? Do you sell both and cash out of both? Or do you hold the real estate, maybe write a 10 or 15-year lease, with the person or group that buys your dental practice and just keep that annuity. A lot of options for you, but the bottom line is this: it is very easy to increase your net worth by 7 figures or multi 7 figures by just buying the building that your practice occupies and doing nothing different than you do anyways. Pay rent either to a lender and eventually to yourself, or pay rent to a landlord. It's a great way to significantly increase your balance sheet or your net worth.
Sounds like a no-brainer if you could do it. In your opinion, how would someone choose the best commercial real estate agent?
Number one, you got to like the person you're working with. It's kind of like, if you talk to somebody and you're not really feeling that person, you don't think they have your best interest in mind, you don't think that they have a good level of communication, they don't follow up with you, or they're not prompt, whatever the things are. If you're not feeling them, go on to the next person. There's too much on the line for you to risk working with someone that's not going to take it as serious as they need to. So first thing is, do you want to work with a person? Do you like them? Do you trust them? And you can get there by asking questions like, how much experience do you have? What would be your game plan or strategy to protect me? Why would I trust you over another commercial real estate agent? Those are great questions. A couple other concepts too. You want them to have healthcare experience. Like you don't want someone who's never done a dental deal or a healthcare deal to experiment on you. Okay, if they're an industrial broker and they work with distribution facilities, that's probably not the person that you want helping you set up your new dental office. And then another question is, do you have conflicts of interest? And this is a concept that's kind of foreign to a lot of people as well, but it's very prevalent in real estate. If you're working with a broker and they represent the landlord of your property or the property that you want to go into, they can't represent you. Like, that's a conflict of interest. Again, that's like having someone sue you and then asking that same attorney to give you advice. Like, it doesn't work that way. If the IRS sends you a notice of you're about to get audited, the IRS agent's not going to give you advice. Like, they're going to say, go get your own CPA. You've got to realize that the listing broker, the landlord broker, is working on behalf of the landlord or the seller, and they're trying to help that person maximize their profitability. They have a fiduciary, literally a legal obligation to help that person make as much money as possible. So the question is, do you represent any landlords or sellers in the area that we're going to be looking, number one? And then number two, are you interested in working for landlords or sellers? Are you predominantly a landlord or a listing agent? Because it's one thing to have a listing in that area or listings and disqualify. It's another thing if that listing agent is going to use you as bait to get in front of a couple of landlords and then take those landlords to lunch the week after your deal is done and ask them if they can list their property. You can be guaranteed that agent did not represent you at the highest level or go as hard at that landlord as they would have if they didn't care what that landlord thought 2 months down the road. So conflicts of interest, a big one. So do you like the person? Do they have experience? Do they understand healthcare? Do they have conflicts of interest? And I tell you this, you're going to know quickly. You either found the right person. If you didn't, go on to the next person. And then I guess the other side of the question is, where do you find the people? You talk to your marketing expert. You talk to your lender. You talk to your CPA. You talk to your equipment specialist. You search Google. You search Bing. You get online and type in healthcare real estate broker. And you find enough people to where you feel like, hey, I've done my due diligence, I've done my research, and I'm going with that person because they're going to help me. They're going to help me win on my next deal.
Powerful stuff. And we don't need to know specifics at all, but ballpark, is it like a one-time fee? Is it based on the percentage size of the deal? Like, what's costs involved for someone who's like, yeah, this is a no-brainer. I want Colin to represent me on this, but what's it going to cost? Like, how does that structure work?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And that's a really important question. Commercial real estate is set up extremely favorable. It's just like residential real estate. The landlord or the seller pays the commission. And so if you're a dentist acting as a buyer tenant, you're not going to ever pay your broker or your agent. It is built into the deal. And so you get the value, you get the time savings, you get the reason of representation, and you get it at no cost. And people say, well, yeah, but if I didn't use someone, I'd save the money. You're not saving one dime because you're not the one paying the commission. If you show up as a healthcare provider, as a tenant or buyer, and you don't have an agent, the listing agent gets a double commission, or the landlord just puts that money back in their pocket. And so the best analogy I can give you here is, if you have a patient who has insurance and they haven't used up their full value of their insurance, what is every dentist doing in October and November? They're calling the patient saying, get in here. You've got value on your plan. You haven't used it. And if that person doesn't show up, the insurance company doesn't send a check to the patient. They don't send a check to the doctor. The insurance company pockets that money. It's the same thing. You show up to a deal without a broker thinking that you're saving money, and all that's going to happen is the listing agent will kiss you on the cheek and say, thank you for being an idiot. And they'll take a double commission, or the landlord will take that commission and put it in their pocket, and you won't know the difference.
Unbelievable. No brainer to find the best commercial real estate expert and work with them. I mean, it's no brainer.
Yep.
Speaking of the best, how could someone reach out to you and inquire more about your services?
Yeah, the best way to get a hold of us is our website. It's carr.us. So it's CARR.us. Upper right-hand corner, you can click to find an agent in your market. We're coast to coast. We're licensed in all 50 states, which is very, very rare, by the way. There's only a few people in the country that have that credentialing. If you want to start a conversation, reach out to an agent locally. If you want to just start a conversation with give me a lease evaluation, you can send that in. We'll get somebody on that right away. And then also, if you're the type of person that you don't want to become an expert, but you do want to educate yourself or get more information, we've got an amazing resources tab that has literally hundreds of FAQs, glossary, tips and tricks, articles, best practices. And so if you want to get educated or just learn a little bit more, just so you feel more comfortable, we have more information on healthcare real estate than anyone else in the country. And it's very informative.
By the way, I love your videos. You got a ton of powerful video content.
We try to push out a good amount. So yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
And I notice you're using Waymark. Aren't you? I think you're using Waymark, which is a video creation platform that just so happens to be one of those sponsors of this podcast.
Okay. You know, obviously that's above my pay grade. So I got somebody in the background or a team of people in our marketing that's helping me with that. So
they're doing a great, anyone listening, Waymark is awesome. Literally you go into Waymark and they have an AI section of it now too, but you can just drop in your dental practice name and literally within 12 seconds, it creates a commercial 30-second broadcast quality. And Waymark, we've been working with them for years. They're a really cool company out of Detroit, Michigan, and doing cool stuff. But and last thing I just want to mention about your website and your brand and your videos, it's beautiful, it's powerful. And for anyone else listening, obviously, figuring out the right, lease or purchase is so important for your just the success of your practice moving forward. But leverage the power of video content. Go to carr.us and check it out. I was really enjoying consuming this content, and just like it's important for you to learn about Colin services, your patients or potential new patients want to learn about the unique patient experience. They want to learn about your passion for clinical excellence. They want to meet the team. And so Google owns YouTube. YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world, and video is considered the heaviest form of multimedia content. So once you've gotten the best deal on your lease or purchase and you got that dream location, leverage the power of video content. Because if you do that and you find the right location after working with Colin, you'll without question be a wizard of buzz. Colin, thanks so much for joining us, buddy.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Keep up the inspiring work, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Buzz Dental.